everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Texas Insider TV show, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. Well, because property taxes, school finance, and the education of our children are always on the forefront of many voters' minds, we're pleased to be able to visit today with the chairman of the State Board of Education, Donna Bahorich. Coming up on her third year as chairman, Donna Bahorich is from SBOE District 6 outside of Houston, and they're working currently on updating the English and the permanent school funding mechanism that many don't realize helps fund our Texas education system. What's going on at the State Board of Education these days, and how does the State Board impact your child's classroom experience? We're pleased to be able to visit today with Donna Bahorich, Chairman of the State Board of Education. Well, Donna Bahorich, Chairman of the State Board of Education, we really appreciate you taking the time to come in and visit with us today.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure.
And I know you've got meetings going on all day here before your State Board meeting. Let's just jump right into it. And if you can, I always ask our guests to kind of give us, and particularly with the State Board of Education, because a lot of folks will have heard about it, but yet not quite know exactly why the SBOE plays such a critical role in our education system. Give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of what the State Board of Education does and why it's important to our school kids.
Absolutely, and as a matter of fact, you're completely right about that. I always start off every conversation that I have in front of groups talking about what is the State Board of Education, because most people understand much more clearly what their own local board of trustees might do at a local school district. They don't understand really what the role of the State Board is. So I would say the major role of the State Board of Education, and the whole reason for our existence, is because of the Permanent School Fund. We only have one constitutional duty, and that is the permanent management of the Personal School Fund.
Really?
To be the fiduciary for the fund. That fund right now is sitting at $44.5 billion. It's the largest educational fund in the country. We passed up Harvard about 3 years ago, which we're pretty proud of that.
Task there.
And so we're very proud of our fund, and we take it very seriously. It's very diversified, and we manage it for risk. And so because of its importance, we need to make sure that we can provide instructional material support for the classroom of today and 100 years from now. So very important. And the Permanent School Fund has two parts of that. 77% of the fund is managed by the Board of Education, and the remainder is managed by the Land Board.
And this is where, on state lands, the oil and gas revenues go into the Permanent School Fund. It was in our state constitution, I believe, to make sure that every child has the materials they need. There's a key phrase that's slipping my mind, but instructional materials.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's really what leads to the state legislature having a budget, because you all transfer, after you've managed it, a percentage of the fund to the legislator to spend on education, correct?
Absolutely. Of course, we have to protect the corpus of the fund to make sure that the body of that fund continues to be strong. But every time we make an allocation to the legislature of the money that we're going to send over to support our students, that's always done with a lot of advice, both from our internal advisors as well as financial advisors that we have that are independent and help us come to the right conclusion about how much money to send over. During the last legislative biennium allocation for the budget, we sent over about $2.4 billion.
Really?
To the fund. We increased the support for our students from $196 per student to $211 per student. So $218, per student. That's it's over an 11% increase from the previous biennium of support for instructional materials.
A big responsibility, and you do have outside managers, which we could talk about all day in the financial markets.
Absolutely.
But how about the framework? I mean, the State Board of Education is frequently in the media in a somewhat negative light because of controversies over the job you do, and that has to do with what's in the classroom. You set up the framework, the architecture, so to speak, of how things get into the classroom. Explain that process if you can a little bit.
Absolutely. So our other responsibilities would include the approval of curriculum standards and then instructional materials built on those curriculum standards. And of course, because these are talking about what our students are going to be taught and what they're going to learn about the world and in order to be educated. And as you can imagine, a lot of people are very passionate about that and have very different viewpoints on what we should teach and how we should teach it. And
That's an understatement.
It's an understatement, but it's absolutely correct.
Yes.
But the board, we work our best to try to work and understand where people are coming from and then try to make good policy decisions. On our curriculum standards, I think what's important is that we have change that process. Every time we go through a curriculum standards process, we learn lessons, if you will, and then we try to improve our process. The latest changes that we've gone through are to include on all of our 4 primary subjects, English, math, social studies, science, we will be including 2 appointees as experts to our normal expert panel as we go through any of those 4 reviews appointed by the Commissioner of Higher Education. So it's the first intentional time that we've specifically given them a spot and allocated them to appoint their own folks as experts when we go through one of those 4 major core subjects.
So that way coordinating from kindergarten to make sure kids can go through college. Folks, I want to thank you again for joining us for this edition of Texas Insider TV. We're visiting with State Board of Education Chairman Donna Bahorich from SBOE District 6 out of Houston. Yeah. And real quick in that regard, explain the subject matter process, because every 2 years you take up a subject of math. It's not all done at once. It's math
Right.
1 year, it's social
Right.
studies 2 years later, English 2 years later. Where are you right now?
Yeah,
on
you
that?
try to spread that out because there a lot of subjects to cover. You've got career and technical education subjects. You've got which have the technology involved. You've got the 4 core subjects, and we are about to do a health review. We've not done a health review for 20 years actually. And that will be started probably toward the end of this year, beginning of next year is what I imagine. The commissioner right now is putting a study together for the board because it's been so long since we've reviewed health that to start from our current standards probably is not the right spot to start. And so we asked the commissioner if he would to put some experts together, and they're doing whatever they're doing right now in studying that. As you know, I mean, we did not have the cyberbullying 20 years ago, the human sex trafficking that you hear so much about, that wasn't even thought of 20 years ago. So there's just a lot of subjects in health, the whole things that we know about brain research and health and exercise, and all those things have changed over the last 20 years. So we really want his commission or his expert panel to look at that and then advise us to a framework how to start. To put together the health standards.
Well, good luck with that, because I know sex education is in there too. Always a fun one.
Well, that'll always be a challenge.
But how about you as chairman, if I can? You were elected in 2012. You've been chairman coming up on 3 years now. You've been confirmed by the Texas Senate. A lot of folks won't know that the SBOE chair has to be confirmed by the
That's
Senate.
Right.
You have some, as every chairman does, some areas that you try and focus on, some things that you want to accomplish. Tell us what you all are working on, what some of your initiatives are, if you would.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this coming meeting that we're having this week, I'm pretty excited about. We have Proclamation 2020. When we call for a proclamation, approve a proclamation, we're always calling for materials based on whatever standards. The most recent standards review that are now we're calling for materials is English and Spanish language arts and reading.
So if I can, a proclamation is what you all issue for
The
English.
instructional materials.
In the next 2 years, it'll be history or something else. But
That's right.
Keep going.
So right now, and so in a project that I've personally been working on with the agency, doing obviously the majority of the work, is to work on interoperability. And that sounds like a very complicated tech word,
Yes.
but I'll explain it.
Okay.
So imagine that you walked into a library and you had no ISBN numbers. How in the world would you ever find a book because the books are organized to a certain standard and categorized in a certain way.
Okay.
Well, currently, our educational content within the instructional materials, because we're using so much technical materials now, online stuff, we're not using the hardback books anymore.
Okay.
For the most part, about 70% or more of our materials are digital.
Really?
That's correct.
Wow.
And so because of that switch, and that's been only in the last 2 or 3 years that we've had that major switch from hardbound books to what's they're using on their computers. And when you make that kind of a switch, you want those materials to be accessible. And so when they're not labeled and tagged with any kind of a standard, trying to find and pull up the information is based on every publisher's way of tagging that information. So,
which is the ISBN
which
number.
is the ISBN number that we don't have. But as of this Proclamation 2020, we have taken our TEKS and have worked with standards organization IMS Global.
TEKS would be Texas Essential Knowledge and
Yes,
Skills.
thank you. I throw
those.
around those acronyms,
That's right.
and not everybody knows. The Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills are our curriculum standards. And we have digitized them, if you will, the way we want to label and organize those standards.
Okay.
So now a teacher on all of those materials will be able to search with a standard way of looking across any curriculum that they happen to have purchased, because they will have to use our way of tagging that information. So we're establishing for the very first time, this is a pretty monumental thing that Texas is doing right now, and it's going to change the way educational content is standard,
Really?
is able to be accessed by anyone across the country, because Texas is moving towards requiring a standardization of our own curriculum standards within that digital material.
We Texans always like to lead the nation. Is this another
This
example,
is
perhaps?
another example
Really?
of how we're leading the nation on interoperability, which is a major barrier for teachers accessing information quickly and easily.
So I know you've been here already working before the actual SBOE meeting on the long-range plan. Is this part of your quote-unquote long-range plan efforts, I guess?
Yes, it is, particularly on the long-range plan for technology piece, which the majority of that work is being done by the commissioner's staff and will be included as part of our recommendations overall. And so they're working on the technical side of that and where we need to go with other interoperability initiatives. But there's no doubt that Texas is now leading the way on interoperability with educational content with this initial move of our Proclamation 2020.
Well, let me ask you one final question here for Donna Bahorich, Chairman of the State Board of Education. You mentioned English being the current subject that you all are reviewing.
For materials.
For materials.
We've already approved the standards.
Walk us through that a little bit. You started probably a year ago. Do you have another year or so to go? It's not a thing that you all accomplish in 2 or 3 meetings. It takes a while,
no,
correct?
no.
And when do you expect to be finished with this English?
Right. Any major case of English and Spanish language arts, it took us a couple years to get through that major revision, because we were doing a major revision that time. After that revision is done, because that subject is so large, we will have 2 proclamations calling for instructional materials based on those standards. We've just, this year we're reviewing the K through 8, the kindergarten through 8th grade, and then next year we'll be doing the high school standards.
And instructional materials are the misnomer.
Textbooks.
Right, the textbooks.
If you will, what we used to call textbooks are instructional materials.
Yeah. Okay, well, Donna Bahorich, Chairman of the State Board of Education, I know you got a busy schedule. We really appreciate you coming in.
Absolutely.
And
My pleasure.
Hope you'll do it again. Folks, we appreciate you joining us for this edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. Remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.